Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we discuss firefighter and paramedic line of duty deaths to learn from these tragic incidents. This week's episode is number 46, Listowel, Ontario, in March of 2011, a double line of duty death at a dollar store that collapsed after an undetected fire and delayed response. There's a lack of public reports and articles for many of these incidents that happen in Canada. But fortunately, Laura King, who's now the NFPA representative for Canada, working at the time for Firefighting in Canada magazine, wrote an article in July of 2012, and most of this discussion is based on that article. Also, we have a pre-discussion about the lost art of laddering buildings, aerial ladders, ground ladders, with our co-hosts Doug and Denis. I'll bring them in now. Hello, Denis and Doug. How are you guys today?
Excellent. How are you today, Paul?
Pretty good. Trying to squeeze in an episode here before I'm away doing some instructing. So thanks for coming down on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it's not exactly spring.
I'm just peachy too.
Yeah, Doug's having some microphone issues, so he's a little frustrated with the computer. I had computer issues all last week, and I think this morning when we couldn't record, I figured out what was wrong. So I'm a little happy actually that I may have fixed it. So let's see what happened this week in the fire service. There was the video released on firefighterclosecalls.com, released a report and a video of a fire in an auto parts store that was a near miss. And so that's worth watching if you want to check out firefighterclosecalls.com and or their secret list that you can subscribe to. You can get emails of near misses and firefighter line of duty deaths that happened. That's the one thing that was interesting anyway. It's a good video, and I haven't read the report yet. What else is going on? Oh yeah, Montreal. You guys pointed out some videos of Montreal really rocking the aerials and lots of
Interesting
aerials
ladder placements. Yeah.
Look like Boston. With a ladder everywhere, which is, we don't do enough. And who was I talking with a while ago saying that the art of laddering a building is lost? Like people aren't pulling ladders the way they should. I think it was you, Denny, maybe on the last episode.
Yeah. I think it's concerns over staffing, but it's also, if you don't do it, you just don't end up doing it. You know what I'm saying? You just forget that it's there because it's not a tactic that you're used to putting your hands on. Nobody's assigned to ladder the building on a regular basis, so it just doesn't happen. And you're up to the captain or the district chief or whoever's in charge at that moment to think about it, right? So because they're not used to seeing it, so you should look at the building and say, what's missing from this building? Oh, a ladder, and go forward with that. So
yeah, I mean, in BC, when I did that emergency site management course, they said, if you send anybody to the second floor or above the first floor, the
exactly.
second in engine, the RIT engine, needs to ladder for another exit route, right away, first thing.
Yeah, vent high, open low, go in with a hose line. Oh, and a ladder.
And a ladder, exactly.
Or two.
In Fort Saskatchewan, when we were had the truck committee, we had some guys on another department that had ladders, in the body from the rear. And really my preference, because of body space and water space and hose bed height, is to have them on a rack. But the firefighter said no, because when it's on a rack, you tend not to pull it. Whereas if it's down, you open a door at the back of the truck and pull the ladder out. It's more convenient, and you tend to use the ladder more. And I hadn't thought of it until they explained it that way. I thought, oh, yeah, I guess so, because otherwise you're lowering the ladder rack to get ladders, and then it's in the way, right? It's sticking out.
Yeah, my last few trucks, I started putting them on a tunnel inside the tank.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, it was behind the compartments on the side of the tank because it's just easier to build a tank that way.
Yeah.
And they were sitting on their beam, so you had a single firefighter could take a 24 out all by himself, just slide it out in the high port position, walk away with it, and of course he's been trained to erect that ladder by himself, so it's a one firefighter operation if it's set up properly.
What do you think, Doug, about laddering?
I think it needs to be done more than I see it being done, and I agree that sometimes it's a staffing or a deployment of staff issue that no one is signed to do that. So I'm always big on people having predetermined jobs when they get there. So, I mean, eh, as far as the ladder rack, hydraulic ladder rack thing, I don't like that because, like you said, it's up and out of the way and no one thinks about it, or there's a parked car in the way, or it doesn't come down, you can't get it. But I've also seen with the tunnels at the back, be it on an engine or a ladder truck, the next in truck parks too close and you can't get the ladder out. So you have to make sure you're not doing that. And I mean, if you swing the tail end of your ladder truck over to try to get the turntable that much closer to the curb, the building, then you might create the room to pull the ladders out of the back of the ladder. And I the ladder racks are always on an engine, and I think the primary truck that should be worrying about laddering is the ladder in an urban city where you're getting both of them pretty quickly. I mean, in a rural department, the engines kind of have to do everything. So I I mean, there's the old school way too of just having the ladder externally on the side of the truck, which in the Canadian winters isn't the greatest because they get full of dirt and grime and ice and snow and all that. So, I mean, I don't know if any one way is the way to do it, but whatever way you do it, you just have to be good at doing it that way and remember to do it or have someone that can do it, especially if we're operating on the second floor.
Yeah, I like that about, the first truck. If there is an aerial coming or a truck, the engine pulls forward so that the aerial gets the prime parking space, which also allows for the, ladder deployment and using the aerial, which that's the big thing is we don't often see, like you said, there was a picture this week of Montreal with at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 aerials set up
More
on a
than that,
on
yeah.
a 3-story building, a la Boston style.
Yeah, and you had to look really hard to even see an engine in there. Lots of the fireground pictures of East Coast American cities, they show you the front of the building and you can't see an engine. You see three ladder trucks all nose to nose or nose to tail or one reaching over the other one or whatever. But the engine's at the hydrant pumping the water through the hose back. Like you can stretch a hose, but you can't stretch a ladder. The ladder has to be where it has to be.
Yeah, why don't we see more of that in Canada?
Well, there's two aspects to that, right? Is number one is you got to have the ladders you need. You got to have them, and secondly, you got to use them.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, good little discussion
I
anyway.
in my experience in Canada is we are so focused on engine work. Everything we do is engine work, water on fire, and we're not the greatest at the quote unquote truck work of forcible entry and aggressive searching. Lots of our searching is done off of the primary attack line instead of it being a complete other sector like it should be at the same time as the fire attack line.
I heard a term this week to replace aggressive search with intentional search or something. So it's not just aggressive, we bowl through everything, but it's our searches are intentional. That if it's safe and we can go there, we you do it. You go ahead and search intentionally, not just aggressively. I thought that was an interesting quote. I saw it on a social media somewhere.
Well, the good thing about that is I think it makes you think about what intentional is. So it's more than just we're going to go in there on the off chances. We're going in for a reason. So
Right.
and it all goes back to OGs and common practice,
And
right? So
training. Yeah.
you're doing things. It's back to Doug's point. There's people who've got a job on this. When they arrive, and they're expected to do that particular job. But again, that's can be a luxury for some departments, particularly some of the rural volunteer departments that are uncertain about staffing, uncertain about who it's going to be. But those are the folks who generally speaking tend to train on every aspect of the job and need to do that. They sometimes don't get as the opportunities to train as much on the job or do get as much on the job experience, which means that their training needs to be that much more realistic and that much more aggressive. So they need to spend a
Uh,
lot more time practicing these skills because again, you can't train enough. You can't train too much for a job that can kill you. That's for sure.
right.
The
And
thing about
well,
the small departments that like don't have the ladder truck, they don't have the truck company. Well, the truck work still needs to be done. So somebody's doing it. So you have to figure out with SOPs, and like you shouldn't be figuring this stuff out when you get there. You have the second arriving engine or the first arriving rescue. Somebody needs to do that job. Just because you don't have the ladder truck doesn't mean you don't do the work that traditionally that truck would do in an urban environment. And there's lots of I've seen courses out there that's like truck work without the truck. Like some even in big cities, I've seen places where just there's the one place in the city that like the three engines get there before the first truck, and they just figure like I know we're an engine, but we're doing truck work because we got here when we got here, kind of thing. So you need to just figure out who's going to do it, and they do it when they get there.
But you got to go backwards though, because when you're specing your trucks and equipping your trucks, you got to equip them so that they're functional in that way. So one department I was in, we had a Quint, and the Quint, of course, doesn't carry much in the way of ladders. So we really missed that, and we ended up putting the ladders that we were missing on the engines. We had one engine that had a 45-foot extension ladder on it, and it was kind of ridiculous, but it was necessary because we had a big hole in that regard. We had a lot of buildings where we needed that ladder at, but that's what we did at that time. So
yeah, because the
you've got
Quint,
to be
the
thinking and think about 28s instead of 24s, because those extra few feet makes a whole difference, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that Quint is nice because you can do that like 28-foot two section, for example. But at the same point, the longest ladder is a 35. You don't have anything longer on a
Yep.
Quint usually. So, but and I was against Doug's idea back in whatever it was, early 2000s, when he said even as a part-time on-call fire department, we should have specific tasks based on the position in the truck. And I was kind of like, that'll never work. We never know who's going to show up, whatever. But that shouldn't matter. And that was his point. It doesn't matter if you're on the center, whatever seat, you're on fire attack. If you're the right front seat, you're whatever, right? And you could do the same to the second truck in. If you're in the back, you're doing truck work. And I was kind of against it, but we did it. And like your crew started it, if I recall, Doug, you talked the guys into it, and it worked well. So that's good.
But if there's nobody in that seat, you got to cover it up.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if I talked them into it more than I just did it.
Yeah.
I said,
Well, that's
I
okay.
said we're doing it this way now. But
Right.
yeah, like I'm huge on you should have the predetermined assignments based on the type of truck you're on, the order you arrive in, and then even farther, the seat you're in that truck. Like you should
Yeah.
just know what you're doing when you get there. And I know there's always going to be the situation that you have to call an audible, right? That's all. I
Right.
mean, a football team has a playbook too, and they get to the line of scrimmage and they go, "Oh, I don't like what I see," and they call an audible. But they walk up there with a plan. Your
Yeah.
plan shouldn't be to call the audible to start with. You should have
I
the
like
plan
it.
already.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
mean,
That's good. We should probably get into the podcast, into the episode.
well, one more story. I became chief of a department, and we went to a fire one day. Actually, it was alarms sounding, but there was something going on anyway. Since I watched the firefighters get off the truck and walk to the building, and then I watched them turn around and walk back to the truck, pick up some tools, basic tools like an axe and a halligan, and then walk back to the building. Went, what are you doing? Like, why didn't you take the tools the first trip?
Right. It's like that. There's
Because
that video.
it wasn't their habit to do that.
I've been watching that. There's firefighter critique or something. It's a bunch of videos on YouTube, and there's a guy that's fairly experienced, and he just has the shorts of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
fire porn, if you will, of guys showing up, and
yeah.
he talks it out like the officer without his coat on or without an SCBA on. Like, why are you there? Those kind of things. How to pull a hose line, you don't know how. It's kind of good that way. I mean, and he does it in a constructive manner.
Yeah,
It's
has
like
to be. Yeah,
it has to be. And the same with our podcast. It's all in constructive manner.
yeah. I
So,
mean, we
so
we, we laugh, but we're only laughing because we've been there.
yeah, we've all done it. Yeah, exactly. Like that apartment building. I was on the third floor, and all of a sudden we found the fire in the wall, and I'm yelling down below at Doug or whoever to get me a hose line. And I don't even have a pack on. I'm on the third floor of the burning apartment building. But
Yeah,
stupid stuff.
yeah.
Okay, well, today's episode is about Listowel, Ontario. Do I pronounce that correctly, Denis?
Yep. Yep.
Listowel,
Listowel.
Ontario. And it's primarily based on an article that was in Firefighting in Canada. I really wanted to do this article. I like to do Canadian episodes since we're all Canadian, but it's really hard to find reports of Canadian events that where firefighters are injured. There's a few, but there's not many. They're hard to get good detailed reports. So anyway, Laura King, who I think now is the NFPA person for Canada, is that
She
correct?
is. She is.
Yeah, she wrote an article in July of 2012 in Firefighting in Canada. So mainly, this whole script here is taken from that about the tragic deaths of two firefighters in 2011 in Ontario. March 17th, and there was a big furor about this because the Ontario Ministry of Labor did a huge investigation into the department as well as the their operations and everything. And there was some fear that they were going to maybe charge the department with not failing to provide the proper training and all that kind of good stuff. So then he's going, it was that close, that close. He's got the little small sign on there. Um, so March 17th, there was relief when the Ministry of Labor came and went and did not charge the fire department over the two firefighter deaths in Listowel an hour before. There was relief that lives would not be turned upside down in a lengthy legal process, as there was a trial after two firefighters were injured, as it happened in Meaford, Ontario. Oh, there's another one we could talk about. Families and colleagues of firefighter Raymond Walter and Deputy District Chief Kenneth Ray would not experience the public airing of details of the fatal dollar store fire. After months of speculation and cynicism about the Ministry of Labor's intentions, it was clear to the municipality and the North Perth Fire Service had met their obligations under Occupational Health and Safety Act to protect their firefighters, which is the whole prime directive, right? ICS life safety is number one. We have to protect our people that are responding. On March 17th of 2011, a dollar store in Listowel, Ontario, had a fire and there was a collapse. And this was what resulted in this whole episode here that we're talking about. While the Ministry of Labor's investigation into the dollar store fire is not publicly available, a Freedom of Information request is required to obtain the report. The investigation by the OFM, Ontario Fire Marshals, sheds considerable light on what happened on St. Patrick's Day 2011. The details, the fatal consequences, have led to a renewed push by the OFM to emphasize incident command, size up, and the need for fire chiefs and officers to know buildings in their communities. Well, and that we've been saying that in every podcast, right? Size up, pre-planning, those kind of things. And properly weigh the risks associated with these structures against the fire department's response capabilities and the importance of educating all firefighters about the perils, in this case, about lightweight construction. Any comments on any of that, guys?
I was at that time I was a fire chief in Ontario, and I remember when this incident happened, and it was one of those incidents where you hear about it and you think, wow, how did that happen? It was just one of those things. And Listowel's not a very large place, and it's all volunteer. And so the actually I went to the funeral and we were standing outside in March, and it was much like March of this year, miserable. And there were thousands of firefighters from across Canada, probably, um, that stood for these guys to honor them. And so the whole thing, I think, hit the community very, very hard, hit the fire department very hard. And it was one of those things where you just you just kept going around in your head. Why did this have to happen? Like, why did this happen? We're not used to line of duty deaths like this in Canada. We don't get them all that often, which is a good thing. And why that is, I don't know. I mean, people have theories and they talk about it. But so when they do happen, of course, they tend to be hard hitting, and we tend to be extremely introspective about why did this happen, and did it need to happen, and what do we need to do to prevent this from happening again. So I think that discussion certainly certainly occurred at the time. There were a lot of voices who said, well, they had no business being there, and other voices saying, well, that could have been us. So, there was everything in between, just as there always is. And here we are talking about this, 13 years later. So,
Well, and
we need to
that's why we're
remember these
here.
things. We need to remember these things.
That's why we're here, right? To keep it in the forefront of our firefighters and officers' minds. The thing is, when I read about this incident, now and before, there's so many common threads with other incidents we've done on this podcast. The Coos Bay auto parts store, where there was a big building. They didn't really see the fire. They didn't know what was going on, and all of a sudden they're opening it up, and there's guys on the roof, and there's guys in the building, and it killed 2 or 3 firefighters. There's that situational awareness, especially with big buildings. We don't realize that they're concealing the smoke, right?
Yeah.
The hall in Bryan, Texas, the Elks Hall or whatever it was,
Yeah.
Knights of Columbus Hall in Bryan, Texas,
Yeah.
and the conditions didn't look bad. The one in South Carolina there, the 9, Charleston, didn't look bad when they showed up.
Yeah. In this case, though, just for our listeners who may not be familiar with this started as a fire on the roof, and it was started almost certainly by roofers who were doing roofing work, and the videos of it at the time were shot before the fire department arrived on scene and so forth. It's very obviously a fire on the roof, and
And
anybody,
we'll get into it.
yeah,
We'll
and
describe it.
and so there's a lot of questions around that, as to what was actually going on there.
Yeah. So as the senior OFM investigator said, Christopher Williams, took care to point out in the interview, of course, is fire investigators enjoy the luxury and the horror of having more information about the circumstances of an incident than the firefighters do when they arrive on the fire ground. So what we know now is based on evidence that we learned from our investigation, Williams says, of the Listowel fire. And that is nowhere near what the fire service may have known at the time. And of course, the fire chief of North Perth, Ed Smith, couldn't agree more. Photos and video from the afternoon of March 17, 2011, shot by bystanders with iPhones and Blackberries. You can tell the date. Helped investigators determine that by the time the 911 call came in at 15:09, the fire on the roof may have burned for as long as 40 minutes. Your typical commercial pre-burn fire where people don't get called. This is not a sudden roof collapse, as was first thought, Williams said during a presentation at the Canadian Fire Safety Association in Toronto. Williams elaborated in the interview that we have a hard timeline of an individual who is on the phone seeing roofers on the roof and plying a propane torch, and that's at 2:29 in the afternoon. We know that the alarm time was 3:09, so half an hour, 40 minutes passed. We're not seeing the fire necessarily burn for 40 minutes, but sometime in that window it ignited. It's kind of like the high school fire we went to, right, Doug, where it was the roofers and the tar pot overheated and over lunch, and they came back up and this tar pot was on fire and it blew up, and there was fire in 7 different areas of the high school. The sprinklers luckily saved the high school, and we played with the rest.
So for those who don't know, roofers, when they're putting a rubber membrane on the roof and there's joins in the membrane, they will use propane torches. Like they got big tips on them, right? Like rosebuds sometimes they're called, and they use that to melt the rubber and the cement to basically fuse it together. And if you've got a substrate below that roof, like a wooden substrate, been to oh gosh, I can't remember how many roof fires, many of them, where you've got a wooden or sometimes they use a combustible. They call it a felt, but it's a material underneath, and it is combustible. And if they overheat it or there's a mistake and the membrane's not covering this material below, you can get a fire start under there, and it can be kind of latent. It's not noticed for quite some time as it slowly smolders and burns, and then it can before it starts to become obvious that there is a fire. So it's kind of a risky way it's done. And I'll tell you a story about that as we go later.
The investigation determined that almost 10 minutes before the 911 call, roofers on the building were told by customers entering the dollar store that they could see smoke. And the roofers, they're up on the roof. They were throwing snow and water onto what they think where they think the fire is, but this was not successful, Williams said. A civilian goes back into the store, brings out a fire extinguisher, and that's not successful. The fire department still hadn't been called. As they're lifting up some aluminum siding on the parapet of the corner of the building on the roof line, they're seeing more flames. So we know at approximately 10 minutes before the 911 call is made, there's enough fire development that a member of the public sees smoke. And then for 9 or 10 minutes, they're engaged in activities on the roof, thinking that they're going to control a small fire. The first in pumper arrives at 3:19, so 11, 12 minutes after the first call, and then is based on videotaped evidence from a number of different sources. We have evidence of critical change in smoke conditions about 19 minutes after the arrival of the fire service, Williams says. And this change happened 69 minutes into the fire, presuming the 14:29 hours start time. And at 71 minutes from the outset of 14:29, that's when we have the roof collapsing. This reminds me of that old hotel fire we went to. Were you there, Doug? We got alarms in the Lacombe Hotel. It's beautiful, sunny spring morning, and I'm on the pump. I'm pumping, and the guys are searching for the fire, and they search, and I'm going, we're going to be here all day. If this building starts to rock, it was built in 1918, or I don't know when it was built, 1910. If this gets going, we're going to be here all day, and I'm probably parked too close. But they found it. The fire had self-extinguished because it melted a water pipe, and the water pipe put the fire out. Otherwise, we would still be there. But then you can't tell what's going on, right?
So a big factor here is a delayed alarm,
Yep.
and the roofers not taking the initiative to call the fire department. And so you have a concealed fire. The fire is burning under the roof or behind the parapet flashing or wherever it's burning. And they don't know exactly where it's burning, and they're attempting to open it up. And so all of this is going on, and they think they necessarily have a small fire. And I want to tell you that fires on roofs caused by roofers don't always end up with the fire department arriving or being
Mm-hmm.
called. And I know this because we used to, one of the places I was a chief at, we used to serve as a fire extinguisher drop-off location because there was no local shop that looked after them. And there was a guy, we'd call him and say, we got 20 extinguishers here. And he'd drive in from the next town. It was a fair drive, and either do some servicing on site or pick them up and return them. So we served as a drop-off location. And one day, one of our local roofing companies, would use our service. But one day he arrived with his pickup truck full of empty extinguishers in the back. Somewhere north of 20 to 30 extinguishers, and loaded them all into our headquarters, and to get them all recharged. And there was that many of them. And I know that we hadn't been to 50 or 40 or 30 roof fires. So
Yeah, they put them out.
they put them out.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I mean,
that's kind of part of their business. So it might go a ways towards explaining, why the fire department wasn't called right away. Um, but tragic in this.
it's so typical in industrial settings that really construction settings, which of course NFPA. I mean, there's been so many big construction fires lately, on construction sites due to hot work, due to whatever, and lack of following NFPA 241. When I used to go do talks, either construction sites or industry, I kept encouraging them, like, call us right away. Don't if you have to turn us back, that's fine, but call us. It's only diesel fuel. Like, we're there anyway. We'll come. And it's really hard to get that through everybody's heads. We had a company in Fort Saskatchewan that hit a propane pipeline when they were doing some construction work on the site, and they never called us. They blocked the roads. They evacuated the area. They never called the fire department until after. They thought, oh, we should give the fire department a call. It's like, hello. Luckily, nothing happened. But and
Well,
they
we're
were a
bad for it
propane
too.
plant.
We
Yeah.
don't call mutual aid. We don't call all that stuff. So who are we to tell them to call us early? We don't call ourselves early.
Yes, that's true. That's why we have automatic aid, right? Because it's not up to the captain to say, hey, we should get some help.
I don't like your attitude, Doug.
Okay, let's get into the call. So the first arriving pumper had 8 firefighters on board, and there was a little bit of white smoke showing upon arrival. 2 firefighters entered the dollar store to conduct a primary search. Pretty standard stuff. Profile. The North Perth Fire Service. The North Perth Fire Service comprises of stations in Listowel, Atwood, and Moncton with a K. It is 65 volunteer firefighters in the amalgamated municipality of North Perth to protect an area of 487 square kilometers with a population of 11,622 back in 2011-2012. Okay, according to Chief Smith, who arrived 3 minutes after the pumper at 15:22, the first arriving crew had seen shoppers coming out of the store. There was no evidence of the roofers in the area. The owners of the building were not seen. The building was being rented. The firefighters had no idea that the building's roof was made of volatile, lightweight construction. They'd gone in to start to look and see what all the see that the shoppers were all out. Smith said in an interview, but they had come back out, and before I took command, I went into the building to take a look around also and see what we had. At no time was I aware of, or were my firefighters aware, that it was a lightweight construction roof. We were all shocked. We thought it was a web joist steel roof. Firefighters returned into the building and saw glowing combustion at this time, or evidence of a fire, and additional crews were sent in to help. In the minds and eyes of firefighters, not knowing how extensive the fire was, and the firefighters are hitting small areas of visible flame, they're thinking they're suppressing a small fire on like the roof deck. There were 2 crews in the building, a crew of 3 on one side and a crew of 5 on the other side near the loading dock. They were removing ceiling tiles, hitting spot fires, and checking for extension, all the normal things you would do in a structural fire. Crews on the side where the loading dock is, they see a change in conditions and pull out. And 3 on the other side, one firefighter is just leaving because his SCBA alarm was gone off, and he's tapping on the other 2 saying, I'm stepping out. He gets to the doorway, and then the T-bar ceiling comes down. There's an instantaneous change in the heat, and that's where the change happens in the smoke and heat. That causes the other guys to try to get out of the building. Firefighter Long, whose alarm activated, gets to the door, is knocked down by the T-bar collapse. And that's the ceiling tile T-bar. They do what they're trained to do. They deploy a rapid intervention team, and rapid intervention team gets to the door where Firefighter Long is. When the entire structural component of the roof collapses, and the other two firefighters are trapped and killed in the fire. From this point, there's nothing they can do. Nothing because of the cantilever nature of the collapse. The structural elements are on top of them, and the entire fuel load of the contents now becomes available to the heat and burns its fuel. And that's just tragic conflagration in the building space after that.
The only comment I had reading it was when the guy said my alarm's going off and he was tapping the other guys saying I'm leaving because my alarm's going off. The whole crew should have been leaving together because you
Yeah.
should keep your crew. But I know from being a volunteer firefighter in a community almost this size and probably a fire department this size, that that doesn't happen a lot. That I mean, you almost just show up and you get made into crews, and you two go do this and you two go do that, and it's not that it should be better. You're a crew. You go do things as a crew. You go out as a crew, and that I don't think like it's not related to the death of these guys, but that's something that should have been done.
Air management, right? And if one guy's SCBA is low, then the other guys we assume are low as well. Although that might have been the most out of shape guy, but still, we're a crew. You're right. We
You
stay
should still
together.
come out together and change your bottle
Yeah.
together and get a drink of water together and go back in together.
Yeah, and I don't know if they were heading out too or not. Like I did that once. Tom Fisher and I in a shop out in the country, and I had an SCBA malfunction. I don't know if my SCBA malfunctioned or I was in such a panic that I was over breathing it. Zero visibility, old SCBA's like with low pressure hose, and we're crawling around in this garage that's really really hot, and we're tripping over car hoists and cars and jeeps and whatever. And I all of a sudden I couldn't get air and I tapped him and said I'm going out, and I went out, and all of a sudden he comes out a few minutes behind me going like, WTF, where were you? I said I had to go out, we're supposed to stay together. I said I told you I was going out. He says I didn't know. And so yeah, it was not good. They had to kind of hold him back. He was going to kill me, but uh, now we're friends.
So what was going on here is obviously there was fire burning below the roof deck and above the T-bar ceiling, and probably it was the structure that was holding the roof up. because they're talking about lightweight construction. So they're talking about basically, wood trusses that are up in that area. And
with the little fish plates on them that's holding it
yeah,
together. And as soon as
yeah,
they get warm, anchor plates. As soon as they get warm, they let go. And
right. And one must also remember that I don't know what was above this, but it was more than likely, like 5/8 or 3/4 plywood or pressboard or whatever, oriented strand board, decking with the combustible decking material above it. So all of that's really combustible. So, they had the fire above the deck and in the deck, and obviously it had migrated to below the deck. So you had a pretty significant fire load here, and you'd be pushing smoke. It'd be oxygen limited, and so when you start pulling out the uh, the T-bar, you start pulling the tiles down and so forth. You're introducing oxygen from below. And so what's going to happen there, of course, is your fire is going to start to intensify unless you put water on it right away. And it's all well and good to be putting water on fire that you can see, but the oxygen doesn't just go there, it goes everywhere. So probably the acceleration in the fire was because it was starting to breathe. So maybe the deck had burned through and you were getting some ventilation, release going up, and you were getting oxygen in from the bottom, and you get a rapid increase, and then T-bar ceiling is just held up by small wires, in virtually in just nails, and quickly tied. And so it doesn't take much for that, and it's usually aluminum. It doesn't take much, or steel, sometimes lightweight. It doesn't take much for that to start coming down, and it's a real firefighter trap when it does come down.
and the roofers had pulled some parapet aluminum off, so there was a chimney, there was a vent,
Quite
right?
likely.
So
Yep.
nice little flow path. The
Yep.
front of the door, the store door is probably open because people are coming in
Yeah.
and out, the firefighters, and they're getting all the people out of the
Yeah.
store. And so it's just a perfect scenario
Yeah.
for this to happen, unfortunately. And
So
they had no idea of what the roof was made of.
yeah. So sometimes we forget that when we're in, and I'm not saying that was the case in this fire, but sometimes we forget, and we're dealing with an issue. We got fire in the corner, in the ceiling, and we think that's the whole issue because we're not seeing everything. We're not situationally aware necessarily that there's a much bigger incident going on around us. It's so
And
important to
command was inside. The
yeah,
chief.
had gone in. Don't know if they were still there or not, but and
Yeah.
and a
So
larger
another.
building, so stuff can, it was at the loading, so it was towards the back, and so if you're
Yeah.
tending to stand towards the front, and I've seen this building. I think it's on a corner, and so your viewpoint is not necessarily a good. There's some great separation there too. Your viewpoint's not necessarily as good as it needed to be to know what was fully going on.
And they might not have had a view from above. They probably didn't have a ladder up, or that kind of stuff to see what does the roof look like.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody actually went on the roof and did that type of site.
Roof report.
Yeah.
Chief Smith acknowledges that hindsight is 2020. Have reviewed the incident countless times with his crews, but more than 15 months after the fire, and with the benefit of the Ontario Fire Marshal report and the Ministry of Labour investigation, which found no wrongdoing, Smith is adamant that his firefighters were exceptionally well trained and followed protocol and procedures. We've discussed this many times in operations and here in health and safety, Chief Smith says, and we've sat and talked about it and said, what could we have done differently? Every one of my people has come back and said what we could have done differently. We didn't know what we had. We were trying to figure out what we had. We had no exposed fire. We could not see flames at the time when it started, and we had very light smoke. And the guys were trying to search out where the fire was. And this light smoke in big buildings is so common. It's like we just forget that it's a big building, and that T-bar ceiling, if it's 50 by 50 or 50 by 70 or 100 feet wide, then yeah, there's a lot of space for that smoke, and it's warm, so it stays up high. It
And it's
doesn't come
concealed.
down because it's still warm, and it's hidden behind the ceiling. You're right. I always used to tell guys, any place you go into, like a business, whatever store, if you're called for a fire there, when you walk in the door, knock a couple tiles out right above the door, see what's in the attic. Although you are giving air, but at least you can see there's no fire above you. But which is
Usually,
what they were doing, but more in the area of the fire.
usually inspection holes when you're putting them in the roofs, you tend to make them as small as you can to serve the purpose, right? Because
Yeah, but it's T-bar. It's easy to pull down. Take
yep,
your New York hook or a
yep,
short pike pole and
yep.
knock it down. And so what? You wrecked a couple ceiling tiles. Smith says they understand now that the flat roof was made of lightweight trusses and the layer of insulation above the suspended ceiling tiles. They were trying to pull down the tiles and the insulation to see what was happening above. We did not know it at the time. We did not know the extent of the fire. And as the OFM stated, the amount of time that the building was burning before we got there that we did not know about probably would have made the difference. But to the fire department, when you pull up, you're not privileged with that information. Nobody did anything wrong, in my opinion. My officer who passed away in the fire had 30 plus years. He knew what was going on, and he was not a chance taker. If he thought there was danger, he would have been out the door with his crew. Nobody knew what they were dealing with. What then is the legacy of Kenneth Ray and Raymond Walter? Laura King wrote. In Listowel, where the North Perth Fire Department has always been known for its rigorous training, twice a month consistency, 3 or 4 hours a night, and where, like many departments, there was a can't happen to us attitude. There's a more somber and serious approach to Mayday practice and firefighter survival. When they sound the Mayday horns now, you should see what we look like, Smith says, because we've lived through it. Now, when we practice it, it's a whole different outlook by firefighters and officers. That sounds so much like Chief Brunacini from Phoenix. As we've lived through it, we know what it's like. That's why we do so much more training. That's why we have command training. That's why we do RIT training, is because we had no idea the concept. And this reminds me of that when I read it anyway. On
That's something to keep in mind when you're a firefighter or a fire officer is don't wait till you live through it. Learn the lesson from somebody else living through it and make sure you don't have to live through it. There's too many, it's like they said, a big attitude or whatever, of it'll never happen to us. Well, it can happen to you. It could happen to anybody. So don't wait for your department to have the event that makes your department change. You can learn from what happens in other departments, good and bad, and make changes to your department based on other departments.
Exactly. Good point, Doug. You're 100%. They said on their new engine, they bought an air horn button on the pump panel. So we didn't waste valuable seconds climbing into the cab to sound the air horn, which would be their evacuation signal. And I used to promote that to lots of departments all the time. Put it right there on the panel. Oh, I can just open the door and reach in. Again, just a few seconds. You don't have to do that. As soon as someone on the radio says, we're going defensive, evacuate everybody, bang, you're hitting the horn. Some departments have had that before, but we never did. Now with this new truck, it has hit home with us. It's just a little change we made, but is that going to, was that going to change the call? No, because they didn't know the collapse was coming. They hadn't called to go defensive. The Ontario Fire Marshals, the incident has led to a partnership with the Roofers Association to look at changing codes for better fire safety education for workers and a protocol for calling 911. Boston Fire, they've implemented that hot work policy from the NFPA. And anybody who does any hot work in Boston has to be certified. They have to have a certificate saying they've taken the training at least to recognize the danger signs with doing hot work and what to do to prevent ignition. I've been to so many hot work fires. What was going on here? Well, 8 hours ago we had the plumber in here. Okay, great. Now we know. Much of the fire code is designed around engineered solutions to building issues and fire safety within buildings, and a lot of the code doesn't regulate the human behavior associated with the use of a flame. Williams from the OFM said. What about the management of the heat source? Let's put a requirement on there and impose a standard of care. There is education and training that could have made a difference. Williams had said the first 2 lines of defense, public fire education and fire safety standards and enforcement, rather than relying on suppression, which, Denny, we've all talked about on the podcast, is we rely on suppression when really it's building code and it's public education for fire safety that is crucial to firefighters. They talk about the roofers more in the report here. We had occupied building with workers on the roof, a combustible roof using an open flame. Had the roofers perhaps, or the shoppers who saw the smoke, been better educated about fire safety, that maybe would have saved 9 or 10 minutes, shaved off the timeline. The outcome may have been different. As for the Ontario Fire Marshal's role outlined on its website, training firefighters, providing best practices, and helping provide the best fire prevention and fire protecting services they can is the goal to help fire chiefs and officers understand their changing roles as risk managers. Big time. We are the risk managers for the community in an area of lightweight construction and combustible contents, highly combustible contents. There was an incident commander on the scene when they went in. The incident commander did transition when Chief Smith arrived, said the Dollar Williams says. When you get into strategies and we start talking about safety officers, accountability, there's nothing that's going to help the team once the cataclysmic failure has taken place. It's too late. The point would be to tactically do as much pre-fire planning as possible and as much size up as possible, then make a decision. If there's no immediate threat to individuals, then we're not going in. If there's no one in there, everybody's out of the store, if it's risky, we might want to hold back. And that's that, intentional search rather than aggressive search. That's a very difficult decision for chiefs because they're wired to believe their job is to put out the fire. We go right for it. And now we're asking them to be risk managers. The key message for dealing with...
How do you know everybody's out?
Right. Did they do a search? Do they have an accountability? We don't know if the staff had that, right? Lots of stores, they don't have a clue, right? So
Well, but
you
lots
need
of
to make
lots of
sure.
everywhere doesn't have a clue, right? They don't know who's in, who's out, who's. I mean, unless you're at a controlled
They're
industrial plant, maybe.
they're
But
supposed to.
like,
They're supposed to. Every office building, every business is supposed to have.
sure,
That's why you sign in when you walk in the door to go visit the
but
lawyer.
you don't
They
you don't
have to know
sign in at
who's
the
there.
dollar store. You don't sign in at the
You don't.
at the
What does
like. There's
Costco
lots of
have?
places you
Why
don't
why
sign
does
in, right?
Why does Costco have a counter that you have to show your card to them every time you go in? You know why? Is they're counting how many people in the store at all times because
Yeah,
they're
but they don't have
liable.
a counter going out. They don't have a.
Yeah, they're
They don't.
checking your receipt.
They're not counting. They don't have a clicker in their hand. They're not
I don't know
counting
if
you
they
leaving.
communicate with the other one or not. I'm not sure if they
And like
communicate.
even still, the alarm goes off. They're not going to go count everybody in the parking lot. They don't know. Like you still have to do a search as a fire department to determine if everybody's out. While you're doing your search, somebody else has to have a hose line looking for fire and putting that out to protect the searchers. It's That's the way it needs to go.
Denis laughing his head off here.
Well,
He just likes
because
you to
I've
be a
been to
go.
Costco and the only thing they're counting are the chip bags.
Chip bags, I like it. Proof. Anyway, you're right. So they had to search. They had to make sure everybody's out. I agree. Which no civilians were caught in the collapse, so that was good.
I mean, how many times
It's
do you go to a grocery store or a store like this for an alarms or
sure,
whatever, and everybody's still shopping? Nobody's leaving.
absolutely.
You're
Yep.
walking in to go check, and they're walking in right behind you, wondering why you parked a stupid fire truck in their way.
The guys in Fort Sask went to a restaurant one night, one of the big chain restaurants, for a fire in the kitchen. And they got there and they said, "Well, can you go around the back door?" And everybody's sitting there eating their meals. And they actually had a fire. The kitchen system had discharged, but they didn't want to send everybody home because if they all evacuated, they wouldn't get paid for everything that they. And the captain said, "Sorry, you guys are done. Everybody out. Like there was a fire in here. We have to check for extension, and you can't serve any more food. You got K agent all over the kitchen." So. But yeah, it's the people don't do it. I know airports are the worst because no one knows what to do. It's like, I already checked my bags. I'm through security. I'm not leaving.
Yeah. So back to something we had talked about on previous episodes was about low frequency, high risk fires, and that's what you're talking about here too. And it's like Doug's pointing out, these buildings are extraordinarily difficult. They're difficult to be sure that the building is evacuated. You don't know. They're difficult to determine what's really going on fire-wise, and they're not necessarily what you're seeing is not necessarily what is going on.
Exactly. And we keep falling into that trap. Why we try to do the podcast and talk about it. I teach incident command, and I use so many of these examples of span of control, accountability, life safety, communication systems. It's all in there as to what happens. Um, communications was extremely difficult on the fire ground, and we're seeing this regularly. Not much of communication failure. It's the failure of recognition of the risk. The tactical decisions as to what's going to be acceptable, what can you do within your means, recognizing that if you're operating within your means and operating safely, that's all we can do. The last episode, Berwick, Maine, a 4-person crew with a rookie on board, and they 2 of them went inside, and the captain got killed, and the firefighter was injured because they only had staffing of 4, and their next available truck was 15 minutes away, and no command on scene. Just the officer who was in command, who was inside up to the 3rd floor without a hose line searching. So it's a good example. Training, pre-plans. That's it goes over and over the same stuff. Emphasis on pre-plan. It's tough for volunteers. When do you find time to pre-plan your training every week for a few hours?
You pre-plan it when you go to the dollar store to buy something. Have
Right,
a look around, right?
but
I mean, I know it's easier said than done. That like not everybody
yeah,
has that on their mind when they're doing stuff, but it's I
Well,
don't know.
there is one thing fire departments can do, and in Ontario in particular, they're very hard on about fire prevention, and they talk about doing inspections regularly, making sure that they're done properly, and that there's sufficient fire prevention personnel. Now, I don't know if there was in Listowel or North Perth or not, but establishing good communications between your fire inspectors and your operationals people. So when information is noted, like the building construction, the size of it, all the critical factors that firefighters would be interested in, that information should be part of the information that could be in the incident commander's hand at the scene of the fire. So that's one way to have that information. And when you do training in the wintertime, then it's not necessarily great weather, and this is probably as much towards career departments, but we used to do it all the time as volunteers. We would haul out, a pre-plan or this type of information. We'd run it through with the company, and you might do that the last half hour of the evening just to get that information out there and just try to refresh everybody's memory that hey, there's a combustible roof on this particular big box building. So there's ways to
yeah,
do it, and I'm sure that they're thinking more about that now in Listowel, and really we all need to do that, but we don't all do that.
yeah. In Western Canada here, I'm sorry to say, especially in Alberta, which I could speak for personally, almost every community under 10 or 15,000 people, there's zero or next to zero pre-planning or inspections done. It's up to the local municipality if they don't have the full-time staff to do it. It's not happening. In the big cities, absolutely, they're all over it. Excellent inspection programs and pre-plans in many cases as well. But in little towns like Lacombe here, the fire inspection program is in many Western Canadian communities is lacking.
And that's
Um,
tragic.
it is. BC's much better. BC's they enforce a lot more. The fire marshal's office enforces the communities to make sure they're doing the high risk stuff, the churches, the hotels, the high risk industry, stuff like that. Here we have rules about it. My last job, whether you know where it was or not. I mean, I did the in the back of NFPA, whatever the 1032, 1031 standard for fire inspections. There's a formula. You can go in there and put in all your occupancies by class, and it'll spit out how many inspections you need to be doing and how many full-time inspectors you need. And I did it, and I needed 3 full-time or 2.5 full-time people. I had nobody to do inspections, and even though we had required inspections, they weren't happening.
Tragic.
I think listening to this event and whatever that I'm not sure. I kind of agree. I don't know what they did wrong. I think they were doing things to the best of their training and ability, and things just went bad and they got caught in it. I mean, knowing that, I think the advice for next time is keep your situational awareness and know what could go wrong if you're in this type of environment, and try to watch for signs of that happening. And like I don't want to point a finger and say they did whatever wrong, but listening to this article, I don't know if the fire departments I've been on would have done much different. You're so far behind the 8 ball when you don't get notified at the right time, and lots of times that's because it's nighttime and no one noticed the fire. But this one, there was a fire, and whoever should have called didn't want to call and didn't get fired from their roofing job or whatever, or whatever the case. But just know as a responding firefighter that it, just because you got called right now doesn't mean the fire started right now. And things could have happened before you got called. And you have to keep all that stuff in the back of your mind. And if you have spidey senses, listen to them.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, some jurisdictions have a requirement for um, lightweight truss markings on buildings. It's not common, but there's some. I think it might be New Jersey or a northeastern United States somewhere that have a requirement to identify on the outside of the building that it's a lightweight truss building. I guess that might have been a hint for these guys in that, hey, watch out, it is a lightweight truss roof. I mean, we got it everywhere now. I mean, floors. How many floors we've had? There's been several now. The big houses and the lightweight truss floors fail early in the fire. And the fire, Panoka had one where the crew walked in the front door and fell through the floor, and they pulled them out. So it does happen.
So there's quite a bit in this article that we're going through that talks about that they weren't aware of the risk in the building. And all through my career, I used to read articles by Frank Brannigan,
Yeah.
who used to
Mm-hmm.
write. You used to write articles, and I think it was fire engineering, if I remember correctly,
Yep.
which wasn't
Know your
really
enemy.
which wasn't really about engineering. But he said, but yeah, that was one of his things. Was he says the building is your enemy, know your buildings, and
Yeah.
he would talk extensively, and we always had photos and explanations and diagrams about building construction. And Vincent Dunn, Vinny Dunn, FDNY, who's now retired and must be well into his 80s now, I guess. He kind of did something similar, and I think in Firehouse magazine, where he was talking about building construction, and he's still doing that now to a degree. I see his Facebook posts regularly. If you don't follow these guys, you don't get the opportunity to learn things you may only see once in a lifetime. Like you're driving down the street and the one of the things they used to always talk about was tie rods in ordinary constructed buildings, masonry buildings. Like these fancy decorative iron plates on the exterior of the building. They're not fancy, they're not decorative, and they're not iron plates. That's not what they're about.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't know that unless you actually dissected one of these buildings and purposely went to find out what they're all about and how they will kill you. And so, something like that. So, so you need to be proactive and you need to learn about the buildings in your community, but you also need to learn about the buildings you don't know are in your community. So
Yeah.
you need to be widely educated in this because I'm telling you,
Need to be.
you may never happen to you, but it could. You could walk
You,
into that building and it could kill you. And
you need to be proactive, right? You need to be situational aware and proactive when you're driving around your neighborhood, when you're getting groceries, when you're doing whatever. Take a look at those things. Actually, the building construction for the fire service on Facebook, I've been posting when he does an article on an episode that we've done. I put the link in the comments, and they're now adding the link to our podcast to their Facebook page,
Vincent
so that
Vincent Dunn, you're
when
talking about. So.
building construction
Oh
for the
no, I'm
fire
sorry.
service,
Separate
it's called.
podcast. Yep. Okay.
It might be. It's a no. It's a Facebook. He posts
It's a group.
anytime there was a building. It's a group, yeah. And so he's now linking our podcast if we did an episode on that
Yeah. So
to that.
so firefighters out there, you guys, you need to be following this stuff. It's not all about cute little TikTok videos. That stuff's not important. There's nothing on TikTok that's gonna save you. Well, probably mostly nothing, but you got to follow these firefighting things. You just got to, spend time on them. And when you're driving around your community and you're looking at your buildings, it's not just, yeah, that's a nice square building. You need to be looking at things like how high is that parapet? If I had to ladder that building, how would I get to the roof? Is there a reason why, like that awning, or something that's hanging on the front of the store? Is there something about that that could kill me? And the answer to all of my questions there is not rhetorical. It's all yes. It could kill you. Yes, you might have difficulty. You could get on the roof and not be able to get off the roof again because of the way it's constructed. In some communities, the cities in particular, there's places you don't want to be walking on the roof because you're pretty soon going to be in the basement. And there's all these kinds of things. So, follow Francis
Yeah.
Brannigan. The book's, not new, but everything in it is about buildings that are still standing today and so forth and so on. So get educated.
Look at Charleston. I mean, yes, the firefighters and there's all kinds of stuff about the operations and mutual aid and whatever, but in the basis, The building was an old supermarket, and there was firewalls, and they were open. The fire doors were open, and they made a breezeway that was not compliant to the repair area. They had stuff stored in the repair area that was not compliant with code. All these things led to the fire that the firefighters then got trapped in.
And just to be clear, there was 9 firefighters died in that fire.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, that was a good little episode about Listowel. I've been wanting to do that one for a while, and thanks everybody for listening to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hopefully, you've learned some stuff to help you do your job and keep you safe. Please give us a like on our social medias and follow us. And ready for the next episode. Do you guys have anything to say at the end?
Stay low and go.
Right on. See you at the big one.
This one.